Webster's dictionary defines bullying as abuse and mistreatment of someone vulnerable by someone stronger or more powerful. But sometimes it's not even about whether you're strong or weak. Sometimes people just pick on you for being famous, for being in the same space with them, for doing better than them. Now, you would only think this is not a common phenomenon when you're neither a victim nor the bully yourself. But according to the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, 1/3 of the globe's youth especially is bullied. And sadly, this has led to dire effects and consequences and even, resulting to suicide. Now, getting straight to this conversation, I'm joined by two people. First, we have Ifeoluwayimika Bamidele, a mental health advocate in Ekiti, Nigeria. We also have Salim Wangabi, a clinical psychologist in Accra, Ghana. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. All right, Salim, while we wait for Ifeoluwa to join us, now most people think that bullying is just picking on someone physically or even as a joke. Now, they seem not to understand how deep it goes. So let us understand bullying from a wider context. In your own opinion, what do you think bullying is?
Well, just like you mentioned and defined, bullying is a repetitive, intentional, hurtful behavior towards a person or a group of people by another person or another group of persons. So it's not just a one-off thing, but it's supposed to be repetitive, it's intentional, and it is aimed at hurting or causing harm to another. And indeed, like you said, bullying doesn't stop at being physical activity. Sometimes it's verbal, it's social, and could also be online. That's cyberbullying. So all of these things would go a long way to affect a person in diverse ways. For most of the times, people would engage in bullying, but then report it as though it was not intentional. But once you do a thing once or twice, and then the recipient, or in this case, the victim, complains or says that I am not happy or do not want to engage in this thing, then you would have to stop. Sometimes what is even more interesting is that bullying becomes institutional and structural. So it's not just an individual doing it for you, but we build the system such that those, especially lately on social media or online, once you're famous, once you have enough followers, people believe that they can say things or type unsavory words or things towards you because, of course, you've put yourself in that space. And if this continues for some time or repetitively, it can lead to a number of effects, just like the one you mentioned, people having suicidal thoughts and feeling worthless and hopeless could be one of the effects of being bullied, both online and in person. But I usually would say that when it comes to bullying, both the victim and the perpetrator are not free. If you find out that you find it so easy or pleasurable to bully a person, I believe you need to have an assessment of your own mental health, because hurting someone, being dominant, being provocative, being aggressive, or being violent has nothing to do with being a better person. It simply means that you have some unresolved issues, some deficient trauma, or some low self-esteem that you try to deal with by being dominant on another person. These are some of the areas and issues that are still with bullying.
From the last part you mentioned, doesn't that mean that we need to promote more of the need for therapy? Because a lot of people, especially those who bully, they don't think that they have issues. They don't think that they're projecting their problems onto someone else. So how do we make them understand that they need to heal? How do we make them understand that it's important to go for therapy?
Well, let me even go back to basics and explain that the defensive mechanisms of every human being sometimes makes it difficult for us to accept reality and accept our own deficiency and limitation as people. Of course, if you were having a disorder or a challenge or a limitation, it takes a lot of energy or courage to come to acceptance and say, look, I have this issue. Case in point, let's have a scenario, say, a bunch of school kids where the older one or the one who looks physically stout is not performing very well in class or has some difficulty with some mathematics or English. And then he finds out that, well, he has physical strength. Instead of accepting that I have difficulties in maybe cognitive skills such as mathematics, I'll use what I have to be dominant. So then he starts to hit and beat those who are smaller in class or who don't have that strength. Same in adult life. Once you believe you are the head of an institution or you are in a position of power, If you have some limitations that you want to suppress or you want to cover up, what do? You rather become dominant and then be aggressive, be violent, be disrespectful towards others so that they are unable to see your own limitation. And like you mentioned, therapy, in fact, would not start working unless you accept that you have a problem. If I prescribe medication for you and you believe you do not have the illness, would you take it? No. But in fact, it is important for each and everyone to know that your mental health, your well-being is most paramount. And anytime you engage in any behavior, be it an aggressive, violent one or harmful one towards another person, and you feel pleasurable about it, you do not see anything wrong with it, then trust me, you need help. Either one, you're also dealing with, well, there's something in psychology we call learned helplessness or learning by observation. Either growing up, you watched other people being bullied, you were bullied yourself, or what we call secondary trauma, you observe some significant other going through it. So you have, in your subconscious, rationalized that such a behavior, it's very fine and you can go through it with other people. But of course not, it is not okay. You don't have to hurt another person to feel better. You don't have to insult another person to make you better. Like they say, blowing out someone's candle doesn't make your light shine, but keeping the other person's candle on will make the room more brighter. So it's important that any individual who feels bullying is okay, who feels being dominant, being overly violent or aggressive or insulting, gives them any power, those are delusions. That's not the case. Because what you do is that when you bully a person, there are a number of psychosocial things that occur. One, they become timid. So they are unable to speak up for themselves or engage in other activities. Then self-esteem is affected. Because you are timid, things that you need to engage in, things that you need to speak on or be present, you are unable to do. When timidity and low self-esteem continues for a while, it leads to depression. And I heard you mention something about suicide earlier on. These are symptoms of major depression. You tend to have low self-esteem, you have thoughts, ideations about not having any worth, being hopeless about life, and then you believe even dying is fine. Unfortunately, we have had parents bullying their own children. We have had teachers bullying their students. We have had employers bullying employees. And this permeates all the layers of our society. And it's important that people start really looking at themselves, really looking at their activities and how they can indeed deal with their maladaptive behavioral patterns.
All right, very well said. Thank you so much for that, Salim. Not surprised that you are a clinical psychologist. But before we go further, I have Ifeoluwayimika Bamidele, a mental health advocate in Ekiti, Nigeria. Thank you for joining us, Ifeoluwa.
Thank you very much. It's good to be on the program today.
It's good to have you join us as well. Now, Ifeoluwa, what do you have to say about bullying? Salim has spoken extensively about bullying and the cause for it. And I like when Salim mentioned that putting out someone else's candle doesn't make your light shine brighter. Ifeoluwa, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes. So interestingly, I've had experience of teaching and contributing my quota in education and speaking to education providers. I manage some educational institutions either as a director or as a support. So the idea is I also teach in universities as well. Bullying is prevalent because three things you mentioned is with the bullying, the consequence, and prevention. So is bullying prevalent? Yes, bullying is prevalent from nursery schools, primary schools in many parts of Africa and the world at large, and as well in Nigeria. Nursery schools, primary schools, secondary schools, and even in universities, as well as workplaces and families. So bullying is a big, big challenge. People are being bullied for a wide range of things, from some things as simple as how people look, their skin color, their hairstyle, their nature, their disposition. So bullying is prevalent and very rampant around and across institutions and establishments. Apart from that, the consequence of bullying include from things that range from death to damages on the person, on personality, their interests, how they want to live. And you can imagine that bullying has a long-lasting effect on the minds of young people till sometimes a later part of their life. How do we solve this? A multi-stakeholder approach. So my recommendation will be to ensure that security institutions, parents, employers, schools, school counselors get involved, and healthcare professionals. We should not wait until there is reports. We should not wait until there's death or the worst case scenarios, but we should be proactive with seeing signs of bullying. Healthcare practitioners and healthcare professionals, school counselors, religious leaders should be able to identify and pinpoint situations. A child comes to the hospital or an healthcare facility as part of the questions that you can ask when a child has a mark on their body. Adults in workplaces, and then people should be more open to talking about bullying and victimization, and we'll be having solutions.
Great. Okay. Now I would like to ask Salim. In Ghana, isn't there like, let's say, an anti-bullying law or something? And if there is, to what extent do they actually implement these laws?
Well, I wouldn't be able to tell in terms of statistics or how many cases or all of that. But of course, to cause harm, to impede on someone's basic rights is of course an offense, and you can always report it. Unfortunately, people who undergo bullying do not have what I call the motivation or the self-efficacy to stand up for themselves and report it. So just like you were saying earlier, when someone has undergone bullying, it indeed affects their self-esteem, their self-efficacy, and self-worth. So this could become what we call the learned helplessness. So you are going through it, it's clear to you, but you can't change it. And so it's important that from parents to teachers, to employers, to be on the lookout of such behaviors. In Ghana, for instance, we always would tell teachers or people who are in charge of minors that it's not okay to just observe other students make fun of another, name calling, stigma, and social isolation. When you observe these things happening, it is important that as a teacher or someone who has some, let me call, power, because usually, taking you back a bit, bullying occurs because there's some power imbalance. One person has some more power than the other. It's important that in a class or within students, you ensure that each person is able to speak up for themselves. They are not laughed at. They are not called names, even when they make mistakes. Because in doing that, you encourage some people to feel stronger than the other. So of course, you can always report it, but I always say those who are in charge of the minors, those who are in charge of the employees, those who are in charge of the student should be on the lookout and also implement policies or implement rules and regulations that punish such behaviors. Because when they go unpunished, you rather encourage those who engage in it to do it. And most of the time, we always will look at bullying as though it's a child or teenager difficulty. But even in recent time in adults, we've seen a lot of bullying in marriages, in friendships, in relationships. And it's important that all of these people take note of when behaviors, especially, like I mentioned earlier, it's not only physical, it could be verbal, it could be social. Anytime you believe that someone engages in a statement, an action, or some activity to make you feel inferior or cause you harm or some pain, it's important to ask them questions, to be assertive, to communicate your distress. And it's okay to complain and say, I am not comfortable with a thing. Because sometimes to be able to adapt and be acceptable within a social setting, you tend to accept things even though you do not agree with, even though you have distress with them. So in doing this, you now encourage people to take charge of their own well-being, and therefore we can then stop bullying or bring it to a minimal level to a large extent.
All right, thank you for that, Salim. That brings me to my next question. I'm going to be asking Ifeoluwa this. Now, something happened recently in Nigeria where, the country lost a very talented, a very young music artist. And immediately after his death, there were videos and speculations and people coming out to say that he was bullied several times and he was threatened, while he was being bullied. So the question is, what do you do in a situation where, just like Salim said, sometimes we tend to want to do things because we're in a circle, but in a situation where we're not comfortable being there, but we're being threatened, if you say something, maybe they do something that is illegal or bad, and you want to opt out, but you get threats, death threats, and even threats that they're going to do more than what they're doing to you. What do you do in that kind of situation?
Because of what has happened recently, in Nigeria and in some other parts of the world where we've had cases of bullying, but in this particular case, Nigeria, it's still an ongoing situation. So it means that we're still talking about it. There's still an autopsy report that's been expected. There might be revelations, and so it will be a bit too early to conclude. However, there are videos on social media about cases of bullying on record. Now, what should someone who is being bullied do? That person is expected to report. And in this particular case where you mentioned, there was some speculation about the person involved, may so rest in peace, having reported at some point in time security agencies. And that is why this type of program and this topic is important, because security institutions, security establishments are expected to be able to give support and succor when people make such reports. Now, it's also important that individuals, groups, neighbors, family, and friends should not wait until situation gets bad before we also speak up. So it is not just the bully who is saying nothing is going to be done. The person who is being bullied is waiting on you as well. If he informs you on the side, he expects that you are going to be able to do something for him. Now we've had walks, we've had candlelight processions, we've had protests, and these are the type of things that should happen way before the person is dead, way before the person is no more, way before the person is manhandled or decapitated. We should ensure that security agencies call them to order. And I'm very aware that they are listening, they're watching the program. They should know that in situations where you overlook a circumstance, a person writes a letter, makes a complaint and says, my life is in danger, I'm being bullied. Somebody has said that they're going to beat me. Somebody has actually beaten me, or somebody has threatened me. That threat may not just be ordinary. It might lead to the end of my life. So security institutions should take it very seriously. Not just should security institutions take it seriously, those of us who are friends, those of us who are family members, the non-governmental organizations, the general society, we should not overlook these things. When a person tells you, this is how I feel about this, don't think, oh, it will go away, it will pass. It happened to me before. They always walk away. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. Don't underestimate the effect of a person's fight or war against bullying. And so we're going to be calling the institutions again to say, when people report, as a school teacher, as a leader of an academic institution, as an healthcare professional, as a security agency, when reports are being made, they should be taken very seriously. But the right thing for anybody who's been bullied to do is to speak out.
Right.
One of the things that the bully often does is that they make you feel that when you do speak out, you will not get help, or that you should not speak out. So for all forms of bullying, one of the major things that the threats do is that they try to muffle you, to stop you from speaking, or to reduce your capacity to be able to speak. Nobody will believe you. Nobody will listen to you. Nobody will act upon it. It's going to be the same thing. So we now have to start taking action to ensure that not only do people believe you, not only do people take action, but the bully is punished for whatever actions that they take.
All right, thank you so much for that, Ifeoluwa. Now, very quickly, Salim, I'm going to ask you, now let's say that there have been anti-bullying laws before now. Do you think that the government needs to intensify efforts, maybe make the rules more stringent or make the punishments a little harsher to make people understand that bullying is a very serious thing?
Yes, and I agree with you. When people go scot-free with wrongdoing, it rather motivates them to continue with that behavior. So until and unless security agencies and judicial services punish people who are guilty of such offenses, then it continues. Just like you were saying earlier, bullying is a whole process and it involves three people: the culprit, the victim, and the bystander. The culprit, of course, like I explained earlier, could be having some mental health issue, and that's why they think bullying is fine. The victim could also be going through some mental health challenges of self-efficacy, self-esteem, depression, and would not report. However, you, the bystander, and this bystander, me and you are included in the bystander, those on the media, the police services, the leadership, the bystander has a major role to play in stopping bullying. So you don't just observe or share on your platforms, you don't just talk about it, but you report to the appropriate institutions and call out the culprits when it occurs. So indeed, victims, might not speak up for themselves, but the bystander also has a responsibility to call out the culprit or the bully and report them to the right institution. When they are reported, most of the times what happens in our society is that there's what we call the family resolution, the societal resolution, where people say, oh, it's okay, let's forgive it, let's let it go. And then it continues and it's repeated. It's important that when people's rights are infringed upon through bullying, the culprit faces the rigor of the law so that they do not repeat it to another person.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Ifeoluwayimika Bamidele, mental health advocate in Ekiti, Nigeria, and of course, Salim Wangabi, clinical psychologist in Accra, Ghana. Thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. And this is where we call it a wrap on Village Square Africa. Thank you so much for joining us. Join us again next time as we bring you the happenings across the African continent. I'm Blessings Mosugu. See you again.